All right, folks, welcome back from the commercial break. What a great discussion with Dennis Prager. Just so much big thoughts that come out of a great discussion like that. Really grateful for his time today. We've got an amazing second guest for you today. Over the last 2 decades, he was one of the most impactful Senate congressional investigators I ever had the chance to work with. He now is the head of the brand new and very important Empower Whistleblower Center, who represents several of those FBI agents, including Stephen Friend, who we had on the show not that long ago. Joining me right now, my good friend, one of the great investigative minds in all of Washington, Jason Foster. Jason, great to have you on the show.
Thanks for having me, John.
It's an honor. I want to turn to some of the stuff you've been doing at Empower, but I really wanted to bring you on because no one has a better view of what was going on in the fall of 2017 when we now learned earlier this week that the Justice Department FBI were spying on Devin Nunes' staff using grand jury subpoenas to get their personal email and phone records in that November-December timeframe of 2017. At that moment, you're the chief investigator for Senate Judiciary and Chuck Grassley. Bring us through why the FBI spying at that moment on the congressional investigators unraveling Russia collusion is so jaw-dropping.
Sure. So just so you guys know, by the way, I have not received a similar notice yet from Google to the one that Cash got. I don't know if mine will come later or if they sought my records or not. But I know I heard you and Cash Patel talking about that on your show earlier, and you guys raised the question about whether Senator Grassley's staff may have also been the target of these, and of course we don't know yet. I haven't received a notice, just so people.
That's good to know. Yeah, that's one of our questions. That's answered. Yeah,
at least not yet, but one may be in the mail. Who knows? No. So I just wanted to go back and talk about the context here a little bit. So people may not recall. You guys in your story, you talked about Rod Rosenstein, sort of making that threat to Nunes' staff. I wasn't there in that meeting. I didn't hear that. I've just read about it, publicly like everybody else. But if you back up, Rosenstein did not get confirmed until late April of 2017. And his nomination was actually on hold for quite a while by Senator Grassley. He was objecting to his nomination coming to the floor and getting him confirmed because we weren't getting answers to the questions we were asking about the Trump-Russia matter. And specifically, we were looking at Fusion GPS and their connections to foreign entities and so forth. So we had a hold on Rosenstein, and actually the only reason that we in the Senate side were able to get and see copies of the Carter Page FISA, which no one knew about at the time, in March of 2017, was because of that hold. The Justice Department decided that, if they wanted Rosenstein to get confirmed, that they were going to have to share these FISA applications with us. And so, we learned, at a time when they were classified, they've of course been since declassified, but we learned in March of 2017 about those FISAs, and we began looking at them and studying them and going over to the SCIF over the several ensuing months. And what people don't, I think, maybe have an understanding of from the public record is, at the time we were sending classified oversight letters. We typically did everything publicly. When we sent a letter, it was a public letter. We didn't typically send private letters. We would always put them out as soon as they were sent, as a way to try to pressure the department to respond. But since this was all an ongoing, counterintelligence review and dealt with classified information, of course, we had to be very careful, and we were concerned that they might be that by sharing it with us, any leaks then would cause scrutiny to come upon us. So, and of course, what happened was we got it in March of 2017. We reviewed the applications. They were leaked, and the Washington Post reported them in April of 2017. It appeared to be from a Democrat source. And then, of course, the Senate Intelligence Committee's security officer was actually eventually indicted for lying to the FBI about his contacts with reporters around that time. And he was the person who was our minder, who was sort of controlling our access to those FISA applications. But it took us a very long time to study them and to do other research and to figure out, because of the way we had to go to the Intelligence Committee in order to look at the FISAs whenever we wanted to look at them. And then we had to take classified notes, and we had to keep our notes in the SCIF, with not even in our own SCIF, right? In the Intelligence Committee SCIF or in the Senate SCIF, and so it took us a long time, but we were actually sending private classified letters that were completely non-public, asking questions about the inconsistencies between what the FISA applications said that Christopher Steele had claimed to the FBI about not having contacts with reporters, and what he had admitted in his litigation, his libel litigation in England. And so, we were sending those letters at that time and really putting a lot of pressure. The FBI had to explain either, when we sent our referral, which didn't get released until I think February of 2018, we were really putting them on the horns of a dilemma. They had to either admit that Steele had lied to them about his contacts with reporters, or that they had lied to the court. And we had lots, we had tense meetings with Mr. Rosenstein over, our aggressive efforts to get to the bottom of this at the time as well. We sent a letter in August of 2017 where we publicly mentioned our earlier classified letters, but of course we couldn't put the content out. So that's August of 2017. I went back and looked at the timeline just to see what was going on around the time of the subpoena for Kash Patel's and the other Intelligence Committee records on the House side. And so that was November of 2017. We had sent a public letter in August of 2017, pressing for answers and referencing our classified correspondence, although not getting into the details. Obviously we knew that by pressing so hard and by, having access to the classified information, that anything that then came out, that might put us under scrutiny and that we might be looked at. We were being, of course, extremely careful to follow the rules, and we never did put out our referral of Christopher Steele, which was all based on classified information, until after, on the House side, Devin Nunes and his committee were able to force the declassification of all the facts and circumstances that were in our classified letters that we'd been sending the entire previous year. So that's the context. And for that reason, I'm curious, obviously, as to whether or not the Justice Department also was seeking my personal records, and for what reason. And of course, there are all kinds of questions about why were they seeking Kash Patel's personal records, and in connection with what? So it's a grand jury subpoena. What is the predicate? What were they investigating? It's been suggested to me that, they might try to claim that they were investigating some leaks related to the FISA application. The only one we know of is the one to the Washington Post, and it was from, appears to be from, the indictment related to Mr. Wolf and his contacts with reporters. So, it's not a surprise, but it is shocking. I mean, we suspected it might be happening. I'm kind of, it's pretty amazing though that 5 years later this comes out because of a Google policy. That they notify the people whose records were sought. And unless the new Congress really needs to do some aggressive oversight of this, and it's going to be tricky because you have grand jury secrecy rules involved. But unfortunately, the real question here is: was the grand jury? I mean, it goes to the core of the grand jury proceedings, right? Was that a legitimate proceeding that was actually investigating a crime, and they had good cause to do that, or were they just using the power and the secrecy of the grand jury to suck up a whole bunch of information, looking for something that they could use against people who were causing them, to have to answer uncomfortable questions publicly about how they handled the Trump-Russia matter and the Carter Page files in particular. We don't know enough yet to know what at all it was related to. But getting the new Congress to do oversight of essentially, was a grand jury abused? right? Was the grand jury process abused? It has all the same difficulties that, that we faced in trying to do oversight of whether the FISA process was abused. And so, I don't, somebody on the, in-house leadership is going to have to really stand behind the committees, and they're going to have to be aggressive and not only issue subpoenas, but have a plan for enforcing subpoenas, using the power of the constitutional powers of the legislative branch as aggressively as possible, because there's going to be major resistance. And it may take a combination of holds in the Senate and actions using the power of the purse and other methods to make sure that they get compliance. But they really have to look at the core of the grand jury process itself, which is a very sensitive thing to do, just like the FISA process was.
I want to ask you about something that sounds very granular procedural, but a lot of the FBI folks that have talked to me since I broke the story on Tuesday have raised it. They tell me that the normal procedure is for the FBI, when they want to get phone records, to get a search warrant, which means they need to have judicial review. By going through the grand jury to get a third party's phone records, as opposed to telling the person themselves they were getting the phone records through a grand jury subpoena, they were able to bypass a judicial review of a judge and just get it through the relationship of a prosecutor with the grand jury, which a lot of people say you can indict a ham sandwich with a grand jury. Anything stand out to you, the fact that they didn't use a search warrant, which would have had a judge look at this?
Well, yeah, that's why grand jury proceedings, are such an amazingly powerful tool to get information, because the standard for a grand jury subpoena is not probable cause, right? Most people think, what hurdle do you have to get over to issue a grand jury subpoena? It's not probable cause. It's a lower standard than that. It's just, it's relevance to their inquiry, right? So, and when you're seeking third party records, my question is, I think something that needs to be explored here by the Congress and its oversight as a policy issue is, well, how do you get to why are people just finding out 5 years later, and how are you ever able to litigate any potential issues? I mean, there are potential constitutional issues here, right? There's separation of powers. So key questions are: did the House leadership know? What were they informed by the executive branch? If they did they have an opportunity to make any speech or debate claims that may have existed, or any separation of powers claims that may have existed? So if you do it all in secret and you never know that your records are being turned over real time, then you don't have an opportunity to litigate the really serious constitutional questions that are there. Right. And so is it just happenstance that Google happens to have a policy here? And what about all the other social media companies or email companies or internet service providers who may have received similar subpoenas? How much information, and then what restrictions are there once the FBI and the Justice Department gets all that information? What restrictions, if any, are there on them being able to, put that into some database and use it for other purposes, right? I mean, are there controls so that, Kash Patel's personal emails are only reviewed by certain people, or does it get distributed to, the whole, Mueller task force or whatever?
Knowing that at the moment that these grand jury subpoenas are issued and these records are obtained, Congress is exercising its constitutional oversight duty. So it's actually exercising a power the founding fathers explicitly gave it. And these guys are, in fact, potentially intruding on that. If you don't get a chance to contest that, it never gets litigated. The executive branch can do whatever it wants during that time frame, right? When you think about the attitude that we now know was exhibited by the FBI and the Justice Department in 2017, they didn't think it was a big deal that the FISA court had been misled. They didn't think it was a big deal that Hillary Clinton had paid for the dossier and that this was essentially a Democratic-funded federal investigation that turns out to be based on completely unsubstantiated, if not debunked information. There's an attitude, there's a swagger, there is a seeming disregard for things like separation of powers, the importance of exculpatory evidence in the Brady rule. What do you think is the potential worst case scenario of what the Justice Department and FBI were doing here?
Well, the worst case scenario is exactly what I said Congress needs to examine, which is the worst case scenario is they were abusing the grand jury process as prolifically as they were abusing the FISA process, right? That they were using that tool not for a legitimate criminal investigation, but rather to gather intel to use in an information operation against, the people who were attempting to hold them accountable. So, it's was the permanent Justice Department, running the show and doing its best to gather information that it could use against the people who were investigating it. I mean, as you know, both Cash and I were the subject of hit pieces. What is the provenance of those hit pieces? Did they ultimately come from leaks from all the information being sucked up by all the powers, in the executive branch? Were they abusing that criminal process? Because, I mean, obviously the problem, and the reason I say it's a touchy issue to investigate is because you absolutely need grand jury authorities, right, to investigate criminals, right? So, it's hard to say that they shouldn't be able to get records, when they need them for a legitimate investigation. The problem is there isn't sufficient oversight of both the criminal and the intelligence functions of the executive branch. They need to have to answer to elected, constitutionally separate branch of government. And they resist expertly, and unfortunately that resistance isn't met with typically with as much expert force from the legislative branch. And so the people don't get, effective oversight as often as they should of these really important issues, because everyone's afraid to, to get to, there are reasons that prosecutors need to have discretion and need to be able to investigate things and need to be able to, and should be quiet about it when they don't charge anybody. That's all correct. But the problem is that means they can also abuse it and not talk about it and secretly leak it to allies in the media. And there's not enough oversight to expose it when they do that, and they can do it with impunity. So the question is that what they're doing? And, I heard you talking with Cash about whether there should be some kind of a church committee. I think I agree. There absolutely needs to be some kind of a serious effort to get the scales back into balance a little bit between the executive branch and the legislative branch, in terms of oversight authority. And, a lot of this would go away if there was just the deterrence that, people knew, oh, if this is going to come to light one day because of a congressional subpoena or a congressional oversight hearing, well, I'm not going to do it. Right. So that really is sort of the global solution to that problem. Sunlight really is the best disinfectant.
It's exactly what our founding fathers intended. It's why they gave the oversight authority to Congress of the executive branch. Now we look at this moment. I think we're going to learn a lot in the next year. It seems as though the House Judiciary Committee is moving forward to investigate this. I want to step back 1 degree now, because this revelation fits into a larger set of revelations. We've known everything about Russiagate. You did such an important job in helping unravel that. But now you see an FBI that was paying Twitter to censor people, clearly targeting Americans while telling the American public they don't censor Americans. They only censor Russian disinformation. That isn't true. The allegiances and alliances, they're giving security clearances to people at Twitter as a way to get in good with them. There seems to be these exercises of power by the administrative state, the FBI, the Justice Department. They don't comply with the FISA court rules. They're spying on a congressional committee during the middle of a very important investigation of their conduct. They're asking social media companies and pressuring them, cajoling them, even paying them to censor Americans' content. There seems to be a larger movement in these law enforcement agencies to further erode the civil liberty protections that we all assume we have. We assume free speech is pretty absolute. We assume if we're a congressional investigator, we're not going to be spied on just because the executive branch is curious who you're talking to. Is there a moment now where these agencies need to be reprimanded, reminded, pushed back on the civil liberties, much like what happened in the 70s with the Church Committee?
Yeah, well, and I think what we're seeing with the revelations in the Twitter files is that a lot of this was the reason for the abuses was because it all occurs in this opaque realm of sort of voluntary cooperation from the social media companies and the internet companies. The FBI asks them for cooperation, and they have these public-private partnerships and these entities that do supposedly are doing some kind of academic research on and sharing information back and forth, and it all gets very murky. And then you have, of course, the wink and the nod relationships, right, where you have people you have so many people at Twitter who used to work at the FBI, both in senior and lower and mid-level positions, and they have friends back at the bureau and can informally share information, and that's rife with potential for abuse, because the reason we have procedures and rules is to provide protections to make sure that that civil liberties aren't being violated. So the problem is you need to have a stiffer spine from the private sector in resisting all the entreaties from government to share information that the government doesn't necessarily have a right to.
It's an enormous moment, I think, in our history. And I think the next couple of years, how we act, how we address these issues, what sort of transparency we get, will decide what sort of country we're going to live in going forward. Yesterday, Matt Whitaker, who is a friend and longtime supporter of FBI Director Chris Wray, came out and said it's time to make a switch at the FBI. Chris Wray doesn't have what it takes to affect the sort of change the FBI needs to restore trust in the American people. Your thoughts on the former Attorney General, someone who actually was in Wray's camp for a long time, now saying, I don't feel like this FBI director has been forthcoming enough, honest enough, aggressive enough. I think he even mentioned he had been co-opted by the bureaucracy. He's more interested in his reputation of what the FBI thinks of him than what the job requires him to do for the FBI. Your thoughts on someone that prominent calling for the end of Chris Wray's tenure?
Well, as you know, I worked for Senator Grassley for a long time, and one of the things that he would say very frequently to anyone in the executive branch who was a political appointee and brought in, and and Grassley would be asking them for information, and they'd be giving all kinds of excuses as to why they couldn't give it. A very frequent response from Grassley to that resistance would be, well, look, you need to either run the department or the department's going to run you.
Those are powerful words, because it's true, right?
And he would say, and because he saw it over, however 40 years, doing this work, Senator Grassley has seen this pattern of conduct constantly. You have the political coming in, and actually a lot of times, even folks on the other side who are politically on the other side of the aisle from Senator Grassley, they would honestly want to try to comply with congressional oversight. And before they got into the position, they thought that that's what they would have to do, and were happy to comply with that duty. But they got resistance from the permanent bureaucrats who've been there forever. And then they would just start mouthing that resistance. And, they don't want to start a war with all the thousands of people who work with them. But that's their job, in a sense. They are the cabinet secretaries and leadership. People who are presidentially appointed and Senate confirmed are in a completely different category from all the permanent career bureaucrats. There's the reason that they're presidentially appointed and Senate confirmed is to convey upon them the duties of being representatives of the elected representatives of the people. They're there to be the eyes and ears for the elected constitutional authority by which the bureaucrats operate. They don't have any independent authority of their own. And so they should have to answer tough questions from a new FBI director, right? And so, I've been disappointed with how a lot of things that happened that weren't on Wray's watch, that he didn't have any reason to defend. He hasn't been aggressive enough in, at least in any public way, in exposing and trying to make change. It's not clear to the average observer that he's interested in making change or admits that there is a major problem. I mean, whether the criticisms of the Bureau are true or not, the fact that you have a major percentage of the country who now believes that the Bureau is on one political team as opposed to the other and is going to have their thumb on the scale in any politically charged investigation, for the Democrats, that's a problem. And it's not a sufficient answer for Wray to say, well, anyone who says that is just, they shouldn't question the loyalty and patriotism of the hardworking FBI men and women. That's not a sufficient answer.
It's not one our founding fathers would have accepted.
And it's not going to convince the people who you need to convince, right? Which is the public. The public has this perception because they're not stupid. They've
seen too much.
They can see what has happened to Hunter Biden or what hasn't happened to Hunter Biden. And they can see they can see what happened in the Trump-Russia matter, and they know full well that if Donald Trump's son had done a tenth of what Joe Biden's son has clearly done, that not only would it be headline news on every news station everywhere, but there would be official action. And so there's clearly a perception there that is a problem in and of itself, regardless of the underlying merits. And the best way to convince people, I said what doesn't work, just telling people you shouldn't question the FBI doesn't work. What does work is transparency. Use the oversight mechanisms that exist, right? Engage with the IG, engage with the Hill, engage with Congress, engage with critical media, and show, answer hard questions and show if there's no political bias, then you should be able to muster facts that demonstrate that there's no political bias.
Yeah. And instead they use deflections. They don't actually address the concerns. Jason, we only got a couple seconds left. I want to ask, how do people follow all the great work that you're doing at the Empower Whistleblower Center?
EmpowerOversight.org is our website, and we put if you go to the media page there, you can see what we've been doing, and there's there's a donate button if people want to help out, and every little bit helps, and we appreciate it.
It's an amazing organization representing Agent Steve, friends, so many other people. Jason, great insights, really important conversation. I want to wish you an early Merry Christmas. We'll be sure to have you on after the new year.
All right. Merry Christmas to you, John.
Merry Christmas, my friend. All right, folks, we're going to take a quick commercial break. We'll be right back after these messages. All right, folks, welcome back. Hard to believe the show went by so fast, but when you got an incredible conversation going with people like Dennis Prager and Jason Foster, the time flies right by. I hope you got a lot out of it. I hope you also got a lot out of that story that we broke. It is an extraordinarily important time in American history. We're learning so much, and we're going to continue to keep learning and pushing and pressing and prodding until we get all that we need to get out there. So God bless you. Have a great day. We'll be back tomorrow with another edition of John Solomon Reports, the podcast from Just the News.